Hi all, and welcome to the webinar titled LS NAV Forecourt, Fuel, POS and Management System. My name is Oliver Jonsson, and I am a product owner at LS Retail. Now first, a few practical issues regarding the webinar. Please ask questions by typing them into the question window that you can find in the control panel in the GoToWebinar session. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and I will do my very best to answer all of your questions. And please note also that this session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the session shortly after the session ends. Now, before I begin, I would like to point out that this webinar is a part of Connection 2018, which will be a year-long online event of training and education. So let's begin. Now, the forecourt market is changing, and these changes have huge impact on the system that you need to manage your businesses. Now, there was a research done by one of the largest fuel seller in the world, which they did with their customers coming to their sites, that showed some interesting numbers. On an average day of the customer that visit their sites, about 35% of those customers was buying fuel only. Now, what was interesting was that about 50% didn't buy fuel at all, but convenience retail only. Now, these customers are not looking for the quick and easiest service so that they can fill up and go, but we're looking for service and good experience. Now, to me, this is interesting in a way how a petrol station has been perceived with a focus on the quick and easy fuel service. So what is happening is that the lines between type of retail industries are getting blurred. People just don't go to your petrol station to buy petrol and car-related products anymore. They come to buy food. They come to buy retail items, and they expect the same kind of service at your petrol station as they get in any retail store or restaurant. So they expect personalized service with targeted offers that fit their interest, and not the old-fashioned, mass-produced, same offers to everyone. They expect to buy things across channels with something like click and collect, which means, for example, being able to order food online and pick it up while your car is being filled up. And they expect to be able to pay as they like with mobile or other devices. For example, with a fuel app that has directions to your stations and allow you to pay from your app so the pump is ready and you can start to pump up. Now, these are today's demands, but more are coming. For instance, connected cars are appearing more and more, and their drivers will be able to have messages with directions and offers straight to the information screens of their cars from your system. So, for example, the car driver gets a message that he needs to fill up, and he can get to your station with the directions and even have an offer while filling up. So how can a petrol station satisfy all these demands? The answer is having a forecourt system which also features a modern and future-proof retail platform that is scalable and has architecture that supports full omnichannel. And I believe that this is really the key to the success of future businesses. Now, the LS NAV Forecourt solution is a part of LS NAV, a feature-rich retail solution which covers the business from accounting to sales and is powered by Microsoft Dynamics NAV. So LS NAV Forecourt includes all the retail functionalities of LS NAV and also includes the forecourt capabilities designed to fulfill the daily needs of a petrol station. So let's look at what this forecourt part consists of. Now here we have a graphical overview of a petrol station with all the devices and the systems in place. So in our forecourt solution, on the store side, you can connect all the devices in the forecourt. That is the dispensers or the pumps, the price signs, the OPTs, the outdoor payment terminals, the tanks, etc. can connect them into the store. Now that means that the POS operator can see what's going on each pump and have some control over them. The POS operator can also finalize transactions from the forecourt, as well as presetting pumps when prepaid, sell tokens for car wash, etc. Now he can also add to the shopping cart other items that the customer wants to buy and finish the fuel sales with the other items in just one transaction. Now LS Forecourt also gathers all the wet stock data from the forecourt. That is the fuel transactions that are pumped both from the dispenser and the OPTs, alerts from the devices from the pumps, and stock information from the tanks. And the system can also push price changes to the pumps and the price polls. Now in the back office, you can manage the setup of your store, that is defining which are the fuel posts, how the tank is set up, etc. So let's look at how this is done, beginning with how can the POS system connect to the pumps and the tanks. Now technically the key piece is the forecourt controller. If I just switch back to this, so we're talking about the forecourt controller here in this picture. So the key piece is the forecourt controller, and what that is, it's a hardware unit that links all the devices in the forecourt, the pumps, the price pool, etc., together. Now the forecourt controllers are of various type and come from different vendors. But what they all do is that they function sort of like a computer router in such a way that they link all the devices out in the forecourt together, and then the POS can connect to this forecourt controller. The way that the POS can talk to these controllers is through an API, an application program interface. Now there is a standard forecourt API in the market from IFSF, which stands for International Forecourt Standard Forum, but that isn't used by all the control manufacturers. So in a sense what that means is that we may have to program specially for a new controller that we haven't talked to before. So a part of the LS solution is the LS Forecourt Controller Interface. It's the one that's shown in the red box here. Now that is a DLL that is forecourt controller specific. So as I said, it's specially made for each forecourt controller type, and that is done either by LS Retail or one of its partners. Now this forecourt controller interface is then used by the POS system or LS Sync service to talk to the forecourt controller, and therefore being able to communicate with the pumps and the price pools. Now one important part of the wet stock information, so an important part of the device out in the forecourt, are the tanks and the stock counting, that is how much fuel is stored in a tank at each time. To have this information, you can either manually measure the tank level in the tank, so-called tank dipping, or you can have a system, an ATG system, an automatic tank gouging system installed in the tank that can constantly measure and deliver the information of how much is stored in the tank at each time. So if a tank has an ATG system installed, the information of how much is in the tank can be then read through the forecourt controller and into the system. And if it's not present, then it needs to be manually measured and entered into the system. So then, the LS Sync service, another key piece of the solution. The LS Sync service handles automatic communication with the devices in the forecourt. So that is the tasks that do not need a manual intervention. An LS Sync service can run either as a Windows service or as a standalone program. So it handles price updates on the pumps and the price pools, and the Sync service To do that, the sync service reads from the controller which fuel items are supported by the controller, and then queries the back office database for updated price information, and then it's configurable how the price update should be performed. Now the sync service also monitor all the OPT transactions, that is, the transactions that are paid at the pump if there is an OPT present there, and stores those information in the NAV system along with the fuel transactions that are finalized in the POS in the petrol station, so that all fuel sales info are available. Now this sync service also collects this ATG fuel level information that we discussed earlier, and also it can read alerts from the pumps so that the system has information about the health of the forecourt, which can be used in the back office. Now one thing to note here is that these capabilities can be limited with the capabilities of the forecourt controller and the devices out in the forecourt. So then, moving up to the POS, how is this shown in the POS? Well, this is done in the LS Forecourt POS Manager, and what that is a bar placed on top of the POS screen, and it displays the status of all the pumps out in the forecourt. So we see here on this slide 2 screenshots from the POS, and on the top here we see the bar. So that's the Forecourt Manager bar, which is also shown here in a larger picture. And for the POS operator, this is really like an extension of the POS screen. He sees his standard POS screen that he's using, and then on top of it there's this Forecourt Manager bar. And this Forecourt Manager is constantly monitoring the status of the pumps and displaying it in real time, what is going on at the pumps. So has the customer lifted the nozzle, has he started pumping, for what amount, etc. This is then showed in the Forecourt Manager with different icons. Now the POS operator can then take a transaction that has been pumped and finalize them in the POS, adding whatever other items the user wants to buy. The POS, the Forecourt Manager also supports the scenario if the customer pumps but doesn't come into the store to pay. So when that happens, the transaction sits in the Forecourt Manager, and after a certain time it's marked as a possible drive-off, and the POS operator can then take the appropriate action. Now, the POS operator can also use the Forecourt Manager to perform various functions, such as presetting the pumps when the fuel is prepaid, authorizing them if they're in an unauthorized state mode, do an emergency stop, etc. Again, these functions can vary based on the Forecourt controller capabilities. Now here we see an NAV POS with the Forecourt Manager on top, and here the POS operator has brought down a fuel sale with octane 95, and also added to the sale a water bottle, 1.5 liters, so we can then finalize the sale and in one transaction. Now LS-NAV supports multiple types of fuel sales, including post-pay and prepay. So here we see how a post-pay is performed on the NAV POS. So here we have 2 screenshots from the Forecourt Manager, and to do a post-pay, the customer, the POS operator, selects the pump which the transaction sits on, and when he clicks on the pump, clicks on number 2, and then there opens a screen showing the transactions that have been pumped but not paid on that pump. So the Forecourt Manager can stack up a number of transactions on each pump, so that is configurable how many. So here there are 2 transactions that are waiting and have not been paid, and this customer wants to pay the transaction for $11.12. So then the POS operator clicks on that icon showing that transaction, and that is then brought down to the cart of the POS, and then the POS operator can either finalize the sales, or as we said before, it can add to the sales what other items the customer wants to buy. Now this scenario I discussed before, the drive-off scenario, the way that is handled in the system is, as I said, the system monitors the transactions that are in the forklift manager but have not been paid. So in the system it's possible to define how long this time is, how many number of minutes the forklift manager waits before marking the transaction as a possible drive-off. So when when a transaction is marked as a possible drive-off, the icon changes, and if the customer cannot be found in the petrol station, the POS operator usually concludes the transaction with according to the processes that have been defined at the petrol station. Often the transaction is pulled down into the cart of the POS and paid with a special tender. Now let's look at how prepay is performed in the system. So to perform a prepay, the pumps need to be in an unauthorized mode. So that meaning that it's not authorized and ready out in the forecourt, so a customer cannot take out the nozzle and start the pump. So what's first needed is to set the pump in an unauthorized mode. And then the icon is clicked of the pump that's going to be prepaid. And when that is done, a window opens showing possible action that can be taken. And then prepay is clicked. And comes up the screen where the user can enter the amount and select the fuel type the user wants to prepay for. That is brought into the cart, and once paid, the forecourt manager sends the prepay instructions to the pump or the dispenser, and it is preset to this specific amount and to pump only this type of fuel that was selected. Now, one scenario that can come into play in the prepay scenario is where the customer has paid for a specific amount, but pumps for less. That's called the underpump scenario. And when that scenario happens, so the pump has been preset for a specific amount, the customer pumps for less and puts the nozzle back into the dispenser again, then a transaction is created automatically in the forecourt manager with the amount that the customer did not pay for, and a special icon appears and the tax refund needed. So if the customer comes back into the petrol station, the POS operator can click on that pump, take this transaction for the amount that he hasn't pumped for, put that into the cart of the POS, and finalize it the way the customer needs, either by refunding him or he wants to pay buy something else for the amounts that he has. So now let's look at let's talk about the forecourt back office, where we have the functionality needed to handle the forecourt products and set up the forecourt station in the system. So centrally there, it's possible to define the setup of the store. For example, POS that's supposed to be a fuel POS, define the fuel products and the grades. The grade is a link between an item in the store and items sold at the pumps, to define tank, fuel points, etc. In the back office, and we'll look at this in a little bit, and in the back office, all the transactions from the forecourt are available, the fuel transaction, both the one pumped inside and the ones that was pumped at the OPT. Along with the gauge transaction that has been gathered from the ATG system in the tanks. So this wet stock information are available in the system and can be used there, or be ready to be used by other systems. So it's very common to have a scenario or a setup where there's another company that handles the replenishment process of the fuel in the tanks, even own the fuel, and the fuel doesn't has an ownership change until the fuel is in the tank. So when another company takes care of the replenishment process, they have the need to be able to see how much fuel is in the tank once a day, or even more often. So in this scenario, these information are available in the NAV system and can be delivered to this external system, or these information can also be sometimes provided by the system that is provided by the forecourt controller manufacturer. So let's take a look at how we would set up the grade link and define the fuel points. So the grades, as I explained, is a term where we have the fuel items in the back office with their standard item numbers, but fuel sold at the pumps, they have another number, so we have to define the link between the items on the pumps and the item numbers in the NAV system. So that is done by defining a grade ID, which then represents the item number that the pumps knows. So for each fuel item, you have to go into the grades setup screen and define what are the grades number for the fuel items that are sold. You also need to define the fuel point. And the fuel point is a pump or a dispenser where different types of fuels can be sold. But typically, a pump or a dispenser has two sides, although where space restricted, one side is also possible. So each side then would be a fueling point. So a fuel point, all the fuel points of a petrol station is defined, and for each fuel point we need to define what type of fuel is sold at that fuel point. And here we see in the back office how we define the tank. So we need to define the tank ID, the store number, the item number, and some information about the tank itself. And here we see how we define the technical setup, sort of how we enter information about the forecourt controller and some information about the behavior of the forecourt manager. Where we would define, for instance, the drive-off minutes we spoke of earlier, and if the manager should play sound when defining a transaction as a drive-off transaction, etc. And then we have a sort of a forecourt profile where we can define if the forecourt is in use, and then what forecourt setup card we're going to use. So lastly, I would want to end with this slide that shows sort of the vision that we have in developing the roadmap for the LS-NAV forecourt solution. And what we call it is the digital petrol station operated from the cloud. So there we envision all the functionality and service we see, predict that will be available in the petrol station of the future, and use this to plan our R&D projects and the roadmap. So in this slide, we see, for instance, connected cars. We see mobile apps that use proximity features to push to the customer customer-focused offers and information. We see, for instance, coffee machines that use IoT technology to inform the system that they need some service. And we believe that with the LS-NAV system and the forecourt module, operators of petrol station have a powerful solution that is ready for the future and the digital changes that will come. So with this, again, I thank you for your attendance. This session was recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording shortly afterwards. And with this, I thank you very much for your participation in this, and wish you a good day. Thank you.